We've arrived at 7:30 and I seem to be on my own, so I'm just going to talk, and no doubt somebody will come along later and watch the recording. I hope you will, particularly if you don't get the chance to come to any of the face-to-face tutorials, because there's a lot of stuff you can learn about how best to approach the exam, which I will deal with in tutorials, and basically I'm repeating here. We're going to look at the shape of the exam, we're going to look at what the questions entail, we're going to look at how to revise best, and one of the reasons I'm doing this now is the revision actually starts now, and you will see why, particularly when we get to part 1 of the exam. Moving on. Overall, it's a 3-hour exam. It comes in 3 parts. Part 1 is worth 36 marks, Part 2 is 32, and Part 3 is 32 marks as well. So there is a roughly even distribution of time. Now, in the exam, everything you do is limited by time, not by word count. So what you want to do is to roughly apportion the time to the marks, and as the marks are roughly similar, you can think fairly simply in terms of 1 hour for each question. Part 1 is slightly different from the other 2, and we'll go on and look at that now. Part 1 itself consists of 3 questions, or at least you have to give 3 answers. What you get is a choice of 7 questions, and you have to answer 3 of them. Thinking in terms of the amount of time that you've got allocated, that therefore means probably something like 18 minutes per question. And you should try to allocate that time something like 5 minutes for thinking and planning and 13 minutes for writing. With all of these answers, I think giving yourself the time to do the planning is very important. So if it says 5 minutes for planning, if your plan has taken you 2 minutes to write and you're really confident that you've nailed it, then by all means start writing the answer. But normally I think if your plan has only taken 2 minutes to write, I would continue to stick in the planning stage for the next 2 or 3 minutes, because other ideas will occur to you and will strengthen the plan. While you think through it, you're also thinking about how you're going to start writing the answer and so on, and so when you come to the writing bit it will be much easier. So do take that 5 minutes to think. Now, part 1 focuses on blocks 1 and 2. So that is the work that you're doing right now, and what you should be doing is building up a store of revision material from your reading and from your work so that you can use it when you get to exam revision time. This is a sample question from part 1. Basically, every question in part 1 is about a theory, one theory or another. You're introduced to a ton of theories in blocks 1 and 2. I added up, there's something like 40 altogether. They will randomly pick 7 out of these 40 to ask you questions about, and it really is random. If a theory has been asked, if a question has been asked in the specimen exam paper, it does not mean that it won't be asked in this one. If a question has been asked in a previous paper, it does not mean that it won't be asked in this one. But they do try and spread themselves around a bit, so they will choose 7 of the theories out of the 40. And you have to pick 3 to give an answer to. And part of the trick here is about answering the question just as it is with an assignment. So you have to know the theory, you have to be able to say what it is, you have to be able to say who thought it up, you have to think of an example or 2 that is relevant to it. But the important thing here is usually in the last phrase where it says, in this case it says, using examples from the course. That means more than 1 example. So if you answer the question and give only 1 example, then you won't get full marks. You will lose whatever marks are available for the second example. A bit of strategic thinking here. You've got 18 minutes to answer this question. It's going to be a fairly short answer. You would normally be thinking in terms of 2 examples, because if you have more than 2 examples, then you're actually giving yourself a very short amount of time to deal with each, and you want to deal with each in a bit of depth. So basically, where it says examples, then think in terms of 2 examples. If it says an example, then use only 1 example. If you use a second example, you will not get marks for it. You've wasted your time. these little nuances about making sure that you actually answer the question are very important indeed, because they can win and lose marks. The other factor about this question is in the first half where it says explain what is meant by a matrix structure, so you have to do that, and give 2 reasons why organizations might adopt such a structure. Again, you've got to give 2 reasons. If you give less than 2, you've lost marks. If you give more than 2, you've wasted time. So do answer the questions in a canny way. Make sure you've done exactly what the question asks you to do. So in this case, you've got to give the explanation, you've got to give 2 reasons, and you've got to use more than 1 example. I suggest 2. And also, in this case, it says using examples from the course, so they've got to be from the B201 material. Sometimes the question just says using examples, in which case you could use an example from outside the course. But where it says, as they usually do, they say examples from the course, the reason for that is they're testing how familiar you are with the course material, so it's got to be from the course material. So that's what a question on part 1 looks like. Here's another one. What is a force field analysis of change? You've just done this, so you know that's another one of the things that happens. The fact that you've done something in an assignment doesn't necessarily mean that they won't use it in the exam. So you have to give the explanation in this case, and it says using an example. So you only want 1 example. If you use more than 1, you've wasted time because you will get no marks for the second one. And then you have to give an explanation about how this technique helps to understand the change process better. So there's 3 bits to that. Give the explanation, give an example, and talk about how you understand the change process better because of what you've done with gluing in that example. This is a question where using a diagram may help. One of the things we do suggest is that you take pens with different colors and a ruler in case you want to use a diagram. You don't have to, but sometimes a diagram explains well. Same principle with the exam as with the assignments. If you do use a diagram, then do make sure you refer to it in the text and refer to it in detail. Don't just do the diagram and leave it sitting there like a lemon. So how you revise for part 1 is very simple. As I say here, it's a memory test. You have to memorize a certain number of theories. You have to link them to examples which will be useful for helping you to illustrate how they work, and you have to stick that all into your memory to make sure that you get it right. I recommend doing some practice plans. I don't recommend actually writing out full answers to exam questions and timing yourself unless you really want to. But what I do recommend is doing something like you've got your theories on index cards or something like that. Give yourself 5 minutes, use a timer to give you a 5-minute deadline, randomly pick one of the cards, turn it over, see what it is, and write a plan that will answer the question. That really gets you thinking, it gets you working hard, and I think it's a very cost-effective use of time. And it's the sort of thing that you can be doing now, because even if you forget in the interval, it will make things much better. You can certainly do a lot of the preparation for part 1 of the question, for part 1 of the exam, right now, not later on. Part 2. Part 2, you get a choice of 3 questions. The topics that we study in Block 3 are globalization, corporate social responsibility, and regulation. And there will be 1 question on each of them, and you have to pick 1 and answer it. So this is a single long question which you have a full hour to answer. And for this I recommend thinking in terms of 15 minutes for planning and 40 minutes for writing. You may find that you work better with different time proportions, by all means do. I'm only recommending this on the basis of my experience, of what basically works for me. And the same lesson applies, or the same practice applies in part 2 and part 1, only on a slightly longer time scale. If you give yourself 15 minutes to plan, take the full 15 minutes. You may have jotted a plan together within 5. Keep working at it, keep looking at it, keep honing the examples, keep jotting down bits of explanation, and take that 15 minutes to plan and prepare before you actually start writing. It is usually time well used. And for part 2, although the topics come from block 3, in answering the questions you are supposed to use material from block 4 as well as block 3. So you're going to be using theories, you're going to be using examples, you're going to be using case studies, and you should try to make sure in your plan that you've got something in from block 4 as well as from block 3. Here's a sample question. This is regulation, drawing on Baldwin and Cave, which is one of the supplementary readings which you will read when the time comes. Drawing on Baldwin and Cave, discuss how business organizations are regulated. Support your answer with examples. It's a very wide-ranging question. It leaves the field open. You've got to look at the overall question of how business organizations are regulated, both formally and informally, regionally, nationally, locally, internationally, and so on and so forth. You've got to look at the classifications that Baldwin and Cave use. And this is an area where you'd be doing a bit of memory work beforehand to make sure that you've understood the theory and can reel off the ideas within it fairly quickly. And you need to make sure that you actually use Baldwin and Cave, because the question specifically says, drawing on Baldwin and Cave, do that. And you've got an hour, you've got a long answer. You should be thinking in terms of using several examples, either examples or case studies, and as I've said already, some from block 3 and some from block 4. It does note the wording of the question. It says support your answer with examples. It doesn't say from the module, so you can use examples from outside if you've got a good one that really fits. But remember that your chief aim here is to demonstrate to the marker that you have worked with and are familiar with blocks 3 and 4. So you need to make sure that most of your examples, if not all of them, do come from the module material. So when you come to blocks 3 and 4, you've still got some organizing and some revising and some memorizing to do. It's quite important to make sure that you've got all that stuff under your belt. How to revise, as is clear, you've got the 3 topics. You've got globalization, you've got CSR, and you've got regulation. You will only be answering a question on one of them, and you might have a favorite one that you feel very, very confident with, and you might stick with revising that one. I would suggest an insurance policy of revising 2 of the topics in case you get an absolute blinder of a question on your favorite that you really can't answer and you need to go for something else. It will also help because any material that you revise for part 2 but don't use may still be useful in part 3, which we'll come on to next. But for part 2, as I say, I suggest revising 2. And in revising, you need to look at all of the definitions. What is regulation? What is globalization? What is corporate social responsibility? What definitions are given in the module? How do the definitions differ? And if they do offer different definitions, what implications does that have for how the topics are treated? So you need to have, for whichever topics you're revising, you need to have the definitions at your fingertips. And with each of the topics there are various debates. Is globalization a social force or a man-made phenomenon? For instance, is it something that is under our control or not? That's a debate which is had. Is regulation necessarily governmental? That is another debate to be had in the regulation field. So you need to look at the definitions and the debates, and then you need to pick from the material, both from block 3 and 4, some examples which you can memorize and reel off, and case studies also which you can memorize and reel off at the drop of a hat. So again, there's some revising and memorizing work that needs to be done there as the basis for the material on which you can show your understanding of part 2. Part 3 is, again, it's a 1 of 3 questions. and this is on the course themes. Theory and practice, ways of thinking, complexity and diversity. There will be one question on each. And the nature of the topics is so wide and so clear in a way that there's more or less only one question that is going to be asked on each of these topics. They just ask it every year with different words. So you're going to get a question on either theory and practice, or on ways of thinking, or on complexity and diversity. And you can discuss that question in any way you want. It is a very, very wide-ranging question, usually. It gives the opportunity to really lay out your stall in terms of how you think about this particular theme. But one thing that is important here is that they're testing you again on your knowledge of the module, and for this question you want to make sure you get stuff in from each of the blocks. Block 1, Block 2, Block 3 and Block 4. So you want to make sure that you've got at your fingertips a number of theories, examples and case studies from each of the blocks. It's the same structure as I said as Part 2, so the same time structure follows. Around 15 minutes to plan, around 40 to write. You'll notice that doesn't add up to an hour, always allow a few minutes for recovery, unforeseen cramps, daydreaming, which sometimes is essential in an exam, and so on. So there's always a little bit of a buffer built in. How do you revise for Part 3? It's quite a difficult one to do, but you can start by using the group blogs. And if you've been writing your blogs intelligently, one of the things you will have done, and if you're not doing it, start doing it now, is tagging your blog messages. If your blog post is about theory and practice, then tag it theory and practice. One of the things that you need to do is to make sure that you're using exactly the same tag as somebody else. If you write theory and practice all as one word with no spaces, and somebody else writes theory space and space practice, or still worse, somebody else writes theory space ampersand space practice, all of those are different tags as far as the machine is concerned. So within your group you need to agree what the tags are for each of the themes, and you should try and tag every blog post with one theme or another. Then when you revise, you look back, you can pick up all the blog posts on a particular theme, you can read through the work that's been done, both the post and the comments, and that starts you thinking about the issues to do. Then I think that in terms of preparing yourself for the exam, the best way to deal with this is to get some past questions or invent your own. And construct a plan. So figure out what the answer to the question is going to be, how you would approach it, and so on and so forth. And the important thing then is to look for theories, examples and case studies from each of the blocks. And this is a very helpful way of structuring your approach to an answer. If you're looking for, say, one theory and one case study from each block, you'll end up with 8 theories and case studies, which more or less is the basis for a 40-minute answer. And when you've got your 8, you might have a look at them, you might strike out 1 or 2 that are less effective than the others in terms of helping you to answer the question. You've reduced it to 6. You've got the basis of a very solid answer there. So if you go through that planning process and that thinking process with regard to, I would say, certainly 2 of the themes, if not all 3, then you're a long way towards conquering this particular question, which is actually a very good test. In fact, I think the B201 exam is a very good exam. It does test you, it really does test you on every part of the module, but at the same time it is possible to pass it, and it is possible to do well in it. I've had a steady supply of students getting past ones in the exam over the years, and it can certainly be done. So moving on from, I say moving on, maybe I've got these things in the wrong order because I thought I had a specimen question, but I don't. I thought I had a specimen question for part 3. I seem to have lost it somewhere. We'll move on to revising in general. This is something you need to plan. It's important to plan in structuring your revision now, as I've said, starting to make a stack of notes about the theories from Block 1 and Block 2. Doing it now as you're introduced to the theories will be very good preparation for the revision. When you get to the revision point of the course, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 4 weeks away from the exam, then is the time you really want to sit down and with a calendar and plan when you're going to do the revision, which bits you're going to revise when, how much time you're going to spend, how many hours, and so on and so forth. Revise obviously by memorizing, that's important. Prepare by writing answer plans to specimen questions. I will provide a whole bunch of specimen questions near the time, and that's something we will continue to practice in face-to-face tutorials. I like the strategy of doing reverse answering. Pick a theory. You've got the specimen exam paper, for instance, and I'll give you some more questions. Pick a theory or pick a case study and work through the questions in the specimen paper and see how you can use that theory or that case study or that example to apply to this particular question. That works towards making you very versatile in using the stuff that you know to answer the questions. You can make up your own questions, as I've said, or I will make others available in the Choose Group forum. Case studies, which come more into prominence in blocks 3 and 4, we already had 1 or 2. Case studies are basically very detailed examples which enable you to go into some depth in terms of what is happening with that particular organization or with that particular field. Innocent Drinks is one that we've had. The San Paulo Orchestra is one that's gone into some detail. And it's useful to go through the case studies and to make an effort to get to grips with the ones that you feel most comfortable with. If San Paulo is one that really struck home, make sure you've got the details, make sure you remember the names, make sure you remember the key issues and what happened and so on. And use them with the reverse answering question and that kind of thing. How can you use that case study to answer that question? Won't be possible all the time, but it will be for most of them. So it's really worth doing that, using the case study, working with it, making sure that you understand it, making sure that you can apply it as flexibly as possible. So that's the preparation. We get to on the day, there are some very basic things to remember. Make sure you've got the date and time right. If you turn up in the afternoon for a morning exam, you've blown it. Make sure you have money for the car park, make sure you know how to get to the venue, and make sure you've got plenty of time to get there. All is not lost if you're a bit late, but they don't let you in for 15 minutes. Once they've closed the door for the start of the exam, they then make you wait for 15 minutes before they let you in. Similarly, at the other end, you can go once you've had a meltdown after a couple of hours. But if it's getting towards the end of the exam, if you finish, say, 10 minutes beforehand, they won't then let you disappear. You've got to wait until the end. So either go when there's 15 minutes to go or wait till everybody else goes. You can take in drink, you can take in food and sweets and so on, but it's really, really important as a matter of courtesy to the other people in the room not to take things in crinkly paper. You will not be allowed to have your mobile phone with you. You need to leave it at the back of the room or wherever the designated place is. You do need to make sure you have your exam card. You do need to make sure you have a form of photographic identification with you so that they can verify that you are the person who you say you are. The books, as it says here, the rules do change about that, but the standard rule is you can take in a dictionary, but the dictionary must have no handwritten notes in it. For the B201 exam, you are not allowed anything else at all. I wouldn't myself bother with the dictionary, to be honest, unless you really, really want to take it in with you. It's, in my experience, more of a distraction than a help. Just just don't worry about it. Make sure you've got your sweets, your pen and your ruler. Those are the main things. Take several pens. Do take colour ones and a ruler. And make sure you've got 2 or 3 pens of the writing colour, because if one runs out and you don't have a replacement, you're a bit stuffed. You've probably taken exams before, you probably know these things, but just in case you don't, you get an answer book. Everything you write goes into the answer book. You put all of your answer plans in it, you put all of your scribbles in it. Whatever you don't want the marker to read, you put a diagonal line through and the marker doesn't bother reading it. If you finish an answer book, you stick your hand up, the invigilator will come to you and you ask for another one. Don't be put off by what other people are doing or not doing. People write with extraordinary variations of speed, intensity and size. I've been in exams where the person on one side of me has been writing solidly for the entire 3 hours. I have never done that in my life, and there is no need to feel that you must just because somebody else is. You actually need to take pauses. These are essay answers which need planning and thinking time, so you need good solid chunks of time when you're thinking about what you're going to do next and not writing it. In one exam I can remember the person on my right was on their 6th answer book when I was just finishing my first. I have no idea what exam they were doing, and people are doing different exams in whatever hall you're in. So the lesson is, do not take any notice whatsoever of what other people are doing. As long as you're doing what you need to do, as long as you're keeping up with time, everything will be okay. And that's it. We've reached the end. It's more or less exactly half an hour. So you've had a good half hour of how to approach the exam. You can listen to this recording at any time. You can play bits of it back if you want to, but it's available there via the TGF. You can listen to it any time you want, and I hope that it does you some good. Thank you.